What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another solo episode of the See-Through Podcast. I'm your host, Lance Johnson, and I live and I podcast with retinitis pigmentosa, or RP for short. Wait, am I wearing merch? Yeah, that's right. I have new merch. I have a new logo, and I have some amazing things to share with everyone. So I wanted to hop on here with a solo episode. So this episode is going to be just me and you, having, a moment. But first, let's talk about the new logo. I want to give a shout out to my sister-in-law. That feels cool to say. Amber, she helped me with this new logo. I've been working with her on this. She designed all the merch. And I want to give a shout out to her. And it's so exciting for me to refresh my brand because I'm heading into 3 years of this podcast. So I thought it was time for me to kind of refresh everything. And Amber helped me out with that. And I'm very, very stoked on what she came up with. And I'm super, super stoked on all the merch options that I have available now. So, speaking of merch, coffee mug, baby. I swear it tastes better out of that mug, something just different about that mug. I think it makes the coffee taste better. You can get a coffee mug, you can get a hoodie, you can get a hat. I got this RP for short tee because I say that all the time, and I'm pretty sure if you have RP, you find yourself saying that a lot too. I also have just a classic, see-through logo tee, and on the back it says "Stay transparent." And if you do purchase merch, just know that not only are you getting a cool item, and anything that I put out in my store is something that I would personally wear myself. And I'll be honest with you, I'm a little bit of a fashion snob. So not only are you gonna look good, you're gonna feel good because you're gonna know you're supporting me and you're helping me keep the lights on here at See-Through. Speaking of See-Through, I call it that because I'm transparent. That's kind of the ethos of this podcast. So let's talk about the growth that my podcast has seen. I want to share some quick stats with you. I know statistics doesn't sound exciting, but I think if you've been rocking with me since the beginning, that these kind of stats will be fun to hear and insightful to, me as like an independent creator and podcaster and like what I'm able to do here independently in my bedroom. So here are some stats for this year. I'll start with this stat. On YouTube, my videos for this year have been viewed over 78,000 times. This year, I transitioned from audio episodes to video episodes, and it's obvious that that's paying off for me. I also just hit the 1,000 hours of watch time mark, which means that I've kept people watching my content for over 1,000 hours of time. And when it comes to streaming, I haven't forgot about you streamers out there. My podcast episodes have been downloaded over 10,000 times and have been downloaded in 46 different countries. All of that from right here in my bedroom. I'm very, very honored that anyone spends any time listening to me. So again, if you've been rocking with me from the beginning of the See-Through Podcast, I want to say thank you. Please know that I thank you. It means the world to me. So that's a good segue into me talking about the changes I'm making to the podcast. Oh no, changes. Don't worry. Everything's going to stay the same for the most part, except for in 2023, I'm still sticking to my bi-weekly episode releases, which means every 2 weeks on Sunday at 9 a.m. Eastern time, you'll get a new episode. So that's the same, right? So what's different? One of those episodes a month will be me solo. In those solo episodes, I'll be giving you life updates. I'll be covering current events that relate to the disability community, vision loss community. And I think it'll be a fun way for you to get to know me better as a host. So, these solo episodes kind of let me kind of express myself a little more and let me have fun. If I'm having fun, hopefully you guys are having fun too. But yeah, that's the big announcement. I got new merch, new logo, new formula for the episodes. Let's make 2023 the year See-Through just blows up. I have complete faith in my audience. I have complete faith in myself, not to sound cocky, but you kind of have to be a little delusional to try to do this thing on your own in your bedroom. Let's be real. All right, now let's get into the episode. Let's talk about what's been going on with me. Here are some life updates. Let me talk about a recent editing project that I was a part of. If you didn't know, I am a video editor and I've been working for MTV and I've been a freelancer for a while. But I recently had a really cool project that I was a part of. And it was for Foundation Fighting Blindness. I was helping out my friend Peter. Shout out to Peter Rossler, by the way. He's a really talented editor and filmmaker. I got to help Peter edit some videos for the Share Your Vision series. It was quite a bit of videos. I can't remember how many. I think it was over 20 different videos that I helped him with. You may have seen these. It's a black background, and it's a variety of different people on camera talking about certain topics, like what blindness means to them, the positives and negatives of blindness, strange experiences that have to relate to blindness, strange things people have heard. But why just talk about it when I can show you? Here's one of my favorite edits from the Share Your Vision series.
It is actually the hard moments in life that call forth all of your potential. If you never had to do anything hard, you would never learn how creative, strong, assertive, resilient you are. I feel this weird, ironic feeling towards having vision loss because I've learned all these great lessons.
Foundation Fighting Blindness. Share your vision. Visually impaired people answer the positives and negatives of going blind.
Growing up as a teenager with low vision, I always felt different from everyone else. I was made fun of a lot, and I really grew to believe that there was something wrong with me, and I wanted to hide my vision loss, and it really, really affected my self-esteem and my confidence.
Vision loss has affected me negatively in a lot of my mental, the way I look at certain situations, and self-doubt. As well adapted and adjusted as I am, I still get nervous about going out into crowds, going into unfamiliar places. Because of that, I tend to want to withdraw and stay at home where it's safe.
I'm a 34-year-old guy with a wife and 3 kids and a house mortgage, a car payment, so everything comes in. It's like, how am I gonna provide? How am I gonna do this, and blah, 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 blah. So mentally, it's definitely tough.
Knowing that I'm gonna lose freedoms of independence, I think is a hard one. And I think it's also makes it, a little tough to find somebody that wants to take the ride with you for life. Just looking for somebody that can understand what you're going through, but know that it doesn't define you, it's just a part of you and who you are.
The negative is heavy, it really is. People ask me, they're like, well, you're so positive about it now, and you're so strong about it, you're saying that your disability is a gift. Yeah, but it's because I had to go through all that negativity. That's why I can say now that I'm happy that I'm visually impaired. It's because I've seen both sides. I've seen the darkest parts of it, and now I'm seeing the brightest parts of it.
A positive thing is it makes me unique, it makes me different, it gives me a story to tell, and the more that we all embrace our own individual stories, we find strength and we find that confidence. And I realized that confidence and happiness with myself was something that I could create. It wasn't just something that I was gonna feel out of nowhere. It was something that I had the choice to do and to feel. So I think that even though I've had a lot of struggles with it, overall, my vision loss has been one of the best things to ever happen to me because, no pun intended, it definitely gave me a different perspective on life, and I don't know if I would be as compassionate if I wasn't going blind.
Vision loss has affected my life very positively overall. It's allowed me to connect with an amazing, thriving community of really, really cool people.
For being positive on it, you don't miss an opportunity anymore. Do as much as you can while you can. You got one life to live, and accept it and take it and do what you can.
In a positive way, I've leaned into it because everybody has challenges in life on some level or something they're going through. I'd rather be attuned to it and understand it than be hit with something later in life that, is a lot harder emotionally.
Positively, it's an easy answer because before I knew that I was legally blind, I was a very anxious person and I struggled with depression because I thought I had these character flaws. I thought I was a clumsy person. I thought I needed to try harder at not getting in other people's way. I was constantly bumping into things and apologizing, not realizing it was because I couldn't see, but thinking it was because I was such a flawed person for not being more aware of my surroundings. And so it made me very hypervigilant, always having to look around and be scanning and looking at my environment to make sure I don't get in someone else's way. So when I was diagnosed with RP and Usher syndrome, it gave me my voice back. It gave me the power back.
Now it's your turn. Share your positives and negatives of going blind. Use the hashtag #ShareYourVision.
I loved working on these videos, and I honestly think that my knowledge of this community from this podcast really helped me as an editor on that project, because I knew what snippets to use. If you're in this community long enough, you start to hear phrases over and over and over again. You kind of know what resonates and what doesn't resonate. But you also learn what new information is exciting, because you're like, oh, I haven't heard that yet. Because a lot of what you hear, you've heard over and over and over again. So I knew, what new information and old information to kind of put in these videos to kind of make them, spicy and new and fresh. Plus, I was just stoked to be, working for the foundation. I went from someone who never talked about RP to someone with a podcast who talks about RP, to getting featured in a Beacon story by Foundation Fighting Blindness, to now editing content for Foundation Fighting Blindness. And I'm loving it. I wonder what's next. So shout out to FFB. Thanks for all you're doing. And I had fun working on that project. And thanks again, Peter, for hiring me. All right, so let's talk about RP Fest. Yeah, RP Fest was the shit, honestly. You may have seen the vlog that I made, which documented it, which if you haven't, by the way, just click the link in the show description. I'll have a link there. Yeah, I basically went camping with 5 other men who have retinitis pigmentosa. But we all hung out around a campfire. We played some Frisbee golf. They even had like a little ATV type of thing that we were driving around and riding around in. And it was a lot of fun. But yeah, why am I bringing up RP Fest? Well, it's a rare occurrence, when you're around a group of guys who have, rare degenerative eye disease. That's a rare occurrence. And I highly recommend, if you have RP, a visual impairment, or a rare disability or anything like that, to find a small group of friends and try to link up, because it's really neat to meet in person. The online community is great and it helps you feel not alone, but when you're in person, it's a totally different ball game. And something that I really noticed from RP Fest and hanging around, these guys, was RP was barely brought up. In fact, if anything, it was probably the least talked about subject. For the most part, it was just us goofing off and laughing, our asses off and making jokes and being silly. And with that said, let me give a shout out to the other guys. We've got Eric, Vinny, Ed, Mike, and Steve. You guys rule. And another thing that I feel like I need to bring up in regards to RP Fest is I had the best vision. And it makes sense because, for someone with RP, I have a lot of central vision left, especially for my age. But still, even with that amount of vision left, in my friend group, I have the worst vision. And outside of my mom, when I'm around family, I have the worst vision of the group. So being around this group of guys, I remember noticing how much more I could see than everyone. I'm not saying that in a negative way. I'm just calling it how it is, and it also made me feel grateful, to have the amount of vision I have left. When it comes to RP, how you perceive it is a big deal, right? I can look at RP in the most negative light, or I can look at my personal situation and find the positives. For someone with RP, I see very well. Do I see as good as my friends? No. But for RP, for what I have, killing it. And it also, perception, all the guys I was with, super positive attitudes, fun to be around, have full exciting lives with families and careers. What a perfect group of guys to kind of use as representation of what you can accomplish and who you can be as someone with RP. But yeah, find your group of people, schedule an event. We're going to do another RP Fest at some point, so be on the lookout for the details of that. All right, moving on. Let's talk about my last podcast episode, which was my wife, Natalie's first appearance on my podcast. And me and her interviewed Andy and Angela Ogg, our new friends. And I'll just put this out there first. It's my most successful episode that I've ever put out. And it's an episode that I've been wanting to do for a while. And the stars kind of aligned and it happened. And I interviewed Andy and Angela, and why that is important and why that is special is because Andy, who also has RP, whenever he was married, he wasn't even diagnosed with RP yet. And after getting married and after having their first child Andy was diagnosed with RP and was considered legally blind all at once. And in a few years' time, Andy's vision diminished to where he is almost completely blind, which has required him to become a cane user and adapt his life completely. And since Andy is further on his vision loss journey, I was able to pick his brain and kind of learn what's coming up for me, which is classic for the See-Through podcast. That's kind of the whole point of this podcast, is I'm trying to figure out what's coming up down the road for me as I live with RP. So what made our last episode special is that, not only was I learning, but my wife, Natalie, was learning from Angela, because Angela, as Andy's spouse, has had to adapt to Andy's vision loss and has had to adapt as a parent to Andy's vision loss. And Andy has had to adapt not only as a husband, but as a parent too. To put it simply, RP threw them a curveball, and now they're adapting to it. So it was really neat to hear that perspective, and also to have my wife on my side and hear from Angela about how she's adapted to Andy's vision loss. And we shared some stories where I could relate, but for the most part, it was just Andy and Angela dropping tons of wisdom on me and my wife. Yeah, I learned so much, and that episode resonated with a lot of people. I got a lot of love, a lot of feedback on it. And if you watched that episode, thanks for watching. But yeah, go check that episode out if you haven't yet. And the reason I'm bringing up this episode in this update is because I wanted to touch on why that episode was so important to me. When I was younger, my biggest worry and concern about vision loss was, would I find someone who wanted to spend their life with me? That was my biggest concern. I'll be honest, that was it. It wasn't my career, any of that. It was like, am I going to be alone in this journey? And that was always kind of the first thought of that spiral I always talk about, when I would have a spiral moment of, because I used to really deny even thinking about RP and what it meant. And whenever those thoughts would creep in, the first worry was, am I going to have somebody there to help me with it? And, having personal strength to go through it all is one thing, but, I'll be honest, like, having a team and having Natalie there by my side makes me feel so much more confident and at ease. And I think finding your teammate is so important, and building a team around you is so important. No one's perfect. Like, I'm not saying that my wife's like on board with everything and she's stoked that like I'm losing my vision. But what I'm saying is she's down for the ride. She's down to be there as things change, and as things change for me, things will change for her. And that's kind of what we covered in that last episode. But, if you're out there and you're looking for someone, I'm not saying settle for anyone. You got to be very, very picky. I'm actually saying the opposite of selling. I'm saying be very picky, because not everyone will be thrilled to go on this journey with you, but someone out there is, and I can assure you of that. Just keep your head up, keep looking, and I'm rooting for you. But yeah, I think building a team around you that supports your vision loss and is going to be there for you, I think is such a huge part of beating RP, not letting RP win. RP's trying to win. It is. It's like that little devil on your shoulder whispering in your ear, negativity. That's not true. It doesn't have to be that way. I hope that encourages you. And speaking of my wife, Natalie, let's move on to a less sappy topic. But Natalie just got her driver's license. And I know for a lot of people out there listening, they're like, so what? It's a driver's license. That's no big deal. But for me, it is. I don't drive. I hung up my keys when I moved here to New York. Driving was too stressful for me. My field of vision had diminished to the point where I didn't feel safe behind the wheel. So I switched to the classic state ID. And my wife also had a state ID because she's from London, and she had her driver's license there, but she moved to New York about 7 years ago and hasn't driven here. So she kind of lost her skill set and didn't have a U.S. license. So she recently has been doing driving classes, and she now has a license. So your boy's back on the road, and wish me luck, because while Natalie is not a bad driver, it's new. and it's scary. But I'm stoked Natalie has a license, because now when we go on vacation, we can get a rental car. We don't have to rely on Ubers, because for the most part, Natalie was just like me. We both relied on Ubers and public transit. So it's nice to have that like added option of driving now, because she has her license. So. And speaking of driving, let me cover a article here. And this article is a downer. I'll be honest with you. It's a downer. So I'm just warning you. All right, so let's dive into article 1, because I have 3 different articles I'm going to go over. Each are a different story. And then I'm going to talk about each article afterwards. But article number 1, let's dive into, and it's related to driving like I was just talking about. It's an article from walesonline.co.uk, and the title of the article is Gran Killed by Blind Driver as She Crossed the Road. And this happened in October of this year. It says Jordan Horter, 29, was suffering from deteriorating eyesight when his car collided with Mary Phillips, 72, as she walked across a crossing. So basically what this article covers is, a grandmother was killed after she was hit with a car while crossing the road, because the driver of the vehicle that hit her didn't see her because he has deteriorating eyesight. He was blind in one eye. The family's heartbroken. She was 72 years old. The driver, like I said, he was 29 years old. He had a number of visual impairments and was effectively blind in one eye when he fatally struck Miss Phillips with his car. He didn't see the victim until she hit his windscreen. After the collision, he stopped and called the ambulance. When it comes to the details of it, the lights were green, so the driver had a green light, but Miss Phillips was crossing the road during that green light. But, people at the scene said that, legitimate criticisms could be made of the defendant. He failed to see the deceased. He failed to keep a proper lookout, failed to steer his car to avoid her, and failed to brake. The underlying cause of all these failures is he failed to keep his eyesight under adequate review ongoing at the time. He failed a number plate test at sufficient levels to keep eyesight acuity. It was a wholly avoidable accident, and a fatal road traffic collision occurred because he drove carelessly. He wasn't speeding or anything like that. The defendant was said to have significant eyesight issues since he was a teenager and had surgery on his right eye in 2007. An optometrist said the driver was basically blind in one eye and needed contact lenses in his other eye. And in 2020, he failed an eye test and was advised to not drive. But in August that year, he was regarded as fit to drive. And that was in 2020. And then by December 2020, his eyesight had deteriorated and he was found to not be fit to drive. But his license was not revoked. So they didn't take his license away. They said he wasn't fit, but they didn't take his license away. And he kept driving. And this is why I quit driving. This is like a nightmare. What I just read is a complete nightmare. I hope the family's doing all right. They lost their grandma and mom. They lost a family member. Yeah, so I hung up the keys. That's my fear. Whenever I was still driving, I thought that this could happen. I totally thought it was possible to happen, and I have better vision than what this driver has, and I know some people who still drive, with, RP and vision loss. My sister being one of them, even both of my grandfathers, one of my grandfathers has passed, but he still drove and he was blind in one eye and he had macular degeneration in his other eye. And then one of my other grandfathers still drives and he has macular degeneration, is basically blind in one eye, which, by the way, macular degeneration is recessive. So I may have to deal with macular degeneration and RP as I age. So that'll be fun. Back to the topic, should the driver have been driving? It doesn't sound like he was advised to be driving, but still was. And he didn't see the lady crossing the street at all and just hit her, whereas someone with eyesight would have seen her. That's the reality. That's the facts. Should she have been crossing during a green light? No. But I think the critiques of the driver not seeing her and being able to adjust and maneuver and prevent it is very, very fair. Yeah, I'm personally under the opinion of if you have, vision loss, significant vision loss, that you shouldn't drive because it's so dangerous to drive. it'd be one thing if you were only putting your life at risk, but when you're out on the road, you're putting others' lives at risk, other families in cars, people going about their day who don't expect an accident, getting accidents all the time. And it would be a shame if it could be prevented, like this situation. And, I think the reason why people still drive with significant vision loss is because, this situation happened in the UK, but, here in America, it's like the world is driving heavy. So if you can't drive, to be honest with you, like it's a huge disadvantage. And, that's why people hold on to driving for longer than they should, because, society is built around driving. So I get it. You want your independence. You don't want that taken away from you. And most places in the world revolve around driving a vehicle to get from point A to point B. You take that away, there's your loss of independence. And therefore, a lot of what you do in your life and your lifestyle will have to change. I understand the difficulties of that, which is why I'm a big advocate for public transit and Ubers, taxis, anything that's improving, helping people get around if they don't even own a vehicle themselves, for people who can drive but can't afford to have a car or whatever. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the point of bringing that up is. I guess the point is like driving is dangerous, so I'm back on the road and I'm passenger side with my wife driving around busy Brooklyn, New York streets, New York highways. And it's scary. So yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think? If you're listening, and for those out there listening, are you still driving? Or what year did you quit driving and what made you quit driving? I know I'm not the only one who had the fear of this real life incident happening. So I guess I wanted to bring up this story because like it was a fear of mine, and now I know that fear is someone else's reality, which is very, very scary. I hope the driver is doing all right. I know that's got to be a mental game changer to have to deal with the fact that you killed someone with your vehicle. Especially, I know there has to be guilt that comes with that too, because you knew you were driving with, low vision. Yeah, I don't know. It's rough, but it is an interesting topic. And so if you're driving out there, be safe, be careful. All right, moving on. I have another article queued up. Let me pull this one up. This article is from CBC News in Toronto. Air Canada apologizes for not letting blind woman fly with guide dog. Says passenger with genetic eye disease describes humiliating experience at Toronto airport. Let's see what happened. So Air Canada is apologizing for not allowing a passenger who is blind to board a flight from Toronto to Minneapolis with her guide dog. Dina Wainwright, a 49-year-old Canadian who lives in Minnesota, says she will never fly with the airline again after being forced to leave Toronto by train, cross the border by car, and take a domestic flight home, which cost her more than $2,000. Wow. Not to mention all the stress, she said. So essentially, Dina Wainwright was traveling. She had her guide dog with her. She traveled to Toronto from Minneapolis, like I said, to celebrate her birthday with her daughter. And she was traveling with her service dog, Lilo, which is a 5-year-old black lab. Wainwright says she was able to board and travel on the Air Canada flight from Minneapolis to Toronto without any issues. At check-in, Wainwright was asked if the animal was registered with the airline, which she was not. They said, oh, that's okay. They handed her a boarding pass and said, have a great flight. But when she tried to board her return flight in Toronto, Wainwright says the service dog was suddenly a major problem. She said the Air Canada staff told her that she could not fly with Lilo because she had not filled out the proper paperwork required to bring a service animal in the cabin of a plane. She was given the option of putting the dog in cargo, which Wainwright says would not have worked since she relies on the animal for help. Yeah, duh. And according to Wainwright, the airline also said the dog could enter the cabin if she proved to them that she had a disability by presenting a Canadian National Institute for the Blind identification card. Wainwright said she doesn't have a card like that because she lives in the U.S., where we do not have an equivalent. So what that means is in Canada, and I know in the UK and in most places around the world, if you're legally blind, you'll get basically like a certificate or a card that kind of states that you are, which again, in this scenario is like almost proof that it's like a doctor saying, like a doctor's note saying you're, legally blind. But in the States, we don't have anything like that. Whenever my mom was traveling solo, my mom's legally blind, I was like, I wonder if there's like a card she can get that like she can wear, to kind of show people that she's legally blind if they ask. But there isn't, in the States, there's not like a card. I don't know why other countries have it, but the United States doesn't. But essentially they're like, can you prove your blindness by showing us your card? And since the U.S. doesn't have a card and she was a U.S. citizen, she didn't have a card to really show. She said it was humiliating and demeaning. And she said that the airline staff during the dispute at the airport preferred to speak with her daughter, who is not blind. That's classic, I've heard about that a lot, where blind people, whether it's in a restaurant or somewhere, anywhere where there's service provided, if a blind person's with someone who is sighted, the person working in that service industry position likes to talk to the sighted person as if the blind person can't speak, which is funny, honestly, when you think about it, but frustrating, obviously. But in the end, Wainwright traveled to Windsor, Ontario by train, crossed the border by taxi, and went to the Detroit airport, where she was able to fly back to Minneapolis with Lilo comfortably at her feet. So all of that, she had to take a train, cross by a border by taxi, all just so she could get her guide dog back, because Air Canada wouldn't let her fly because she couldn't prove her blindness. All of that because she couldn't prove her blindness with a card. Cost her over $2,000. She said she'll never fly Air Canada again. Air Canada responded saying dogs must be registered at least 48 hours to a trip. It's not clear why Wainwright wasn't informed of this ahead of her flight, or why she was able to bring her dog on the first leg of the trip without any problems. An Air Canada spokesperson called the situation regrettable and said the airline has spoken with and apologized to Wainwright. Yeah, they apologized only because they had to. And the last thing I'll add to the article is it mentions that Larissa Proctor, who is a manager of a guide dog advocacy group with the Canadian Institute for the Blind, says that guide dogs are commonly brought on board flights and should not go in cargo, as they are trained to curl up at a passenger's feet. While it is common practice for guide dogs to fly in the cabin, Proctor recommends that travelers find out the rules in place before traveling, as they may vary depending on the airline, which means calling the airline in advance to find out what sort of forms need to be completed, etc. Yeah. And that article was written by Trevor Dunn, and the link to the article is in the show description. But yeah, it's unreal, right? That Americans don't have a card, for one, to kind of prove their blindness. But the fact also, too, that you have to prove your blindness, like you have a guide dog with you that obviously was let in, and then you're not allowed to bring it on. If I was in the passenger's shoes, I would be furious, because she had to pay over $2,000 to get home just with her guide dog, when they said, if you can prove it, we'll let you on. Oh, that hurts. That hurts. Does anyone out there have any advice, for traveling? I know cane users, I know the process for that, because I've helped my mom travel, and I've talking with, friends who travel, with their cane, who are legally blind. But yeah, it's interesting, the whole thing, and how it works with different countries. But yeah, I know this is just one instance of thousands and thousands and thousands of frustrating things that happen, with guide dogs, and being denied of service, and, being asked to prove blindness and prove this and prove that, or you don't look blind, this and that. So yeah, it's a unique scenario, but I just wanted to touch on it because, one, you might find it helpful if you have a guide dog and you're thinking of traveling, maybe it's worth, like the article mentioned, calling ahead. Also, I wanted to know if anyone out there in the States does have a card. Like, is that a thing, having a card? Because as far as I know, there isn't a card that you can pull out to prove, your blindness. So I guess it's on you know, you to describe it. You know, where's our doctor's note? Like we used to have to miss school. But let's move on to a new article. This one I found interesting, and it's about trauma. This article is found on medicalexpress.com. I'll have a link in the show description if you want to read the full article. It's titled Trauma of Diagnosis Stays with Eye Disease Patients. And then it goes in to say, the way in which a patient is told they have a serious eye disease can impact their psychological health and ability to cope with their condition in the long term, according to new research published in the open access journal BMJ Open. And by the way, this article was published in July of this year. It says a research team interviewed patients across a wide range of ages who had been diagnosed with the eye disease in England over the course of several decades and assessed the psychological impact of the way their diagnosis was communicated. Interviewees had been diagnosed with a variety of conditions, including diabetic retinopathy, macular degeneration, Stargardt disease, and retinitis pigmentosa, or RP for short. Sorry, I'm going to do that every time. And the interview showed 4 themes. So 4 themes here. The convoluted process of being diagnosed, the impact of clinicians' words, the search for information, and reflections on what could have been improved. It says, researchers found that patients often vividly remembered the way they were told they had their condition and the manner of the medical professional that delivered the news. This impacted on how they saw their vision loss and themselves, as well as their interactions with other people. One patient described the news as like being hit with a brick. Another patient said it was very brief and very clinical. They literally told me that I had this, and in time was slowly going blind. There was no cure. Some had waited months or years for diagnosis, from initially being aware of a problem, creating a sense of frustration and anxiety. One younger patient said, you're told something is wrong. You're going to have to make an appointment in 14 weeks to have this test done. You need to wait 5 or 6 months for the results. 5 or 6 months is a long time when you're waking up every day worried and you're not sleeping well, and it's affecting relationships with other people and potentially your job. Some patients felt the need to go on the internet to find out more, coming across misinformation and scare stories online, increasing their anxiety about their condition. Yeah. I'm sure this article's already resonating with me. I was diagnosed when I was 12, which is essentially I was a little kid. So it didn't really sink in with me the way it's probably sinking in with these people, who are adults, getting told, they're going blind. It's a very big deal. It says Dr. Jolly, associate professor at Angela Ruskin University's Vision and Eye Research Institute, said being given a diagnosis of eye disease can be unexpected and devastating. That's true. The moment of diagnosis is emotionally charged, and interactions with clinicians can have a lasting impact on how a patient comes to terms with their visual impairment. If patients don't feel they have received enough information, this can lead them to feeling lost and often searching for the details from less reliable sources. This is one of the first studies to examine how the communication of a diagnosis impacts psychologically on a patient in the long term. And we found that the words and demeanor of the medical professionals affected a patient's ability to come to terms with their condition. It says clinicians should carefully consider how to communicate a diagnosis to patients, how and when they offer information about diagnosis or prognosis. Yeah. It does matter how we're told. It does matter how we feel in these doctors' offices. That's why I hate going to a retinal specialist. Like in North Carolina, and I've been a few times here in New York. I made vlogs about it if you want to watch it. You go in, you feel like a lab rat. Let's be real. You go in, they're doing field vision tests, they're doing ERGs, they're taking photography of your eyes with very, very bright lights going in your eyes. And then they're looking at your retina being like, ooh, this looks different. Like I remember in North Carolina, I would go to the Kittner Eye Center, and it was part of a university. So it had basically people in grad school kind of shadowing, my retinal specialist. So they were, using my time with the doctor as like almost their research. So the doctor would be like, check this out. And they would like show them images of my eyes. And it's like, since RP is rare, these people in grad school were kind of like, honestly, they were kind of like excited to see what the inside of my eyes looked like, which I totally get why they would be excited about that, but doesn't mean I'm excited about it. I don't like feeling like a lab rat. I don't like being, the anomaly that causes excitement because it's rare. But yeah, it matters. It matters how doctors makes us feel. I think it matters more than they know. I think doctors care. I just think that they're so busy that they don't have the time and energy to lay it out there the way they should. Something's wrong with it. The process. And, when you're told, like I said, I was told when I was 12, and my mom cried because she was in the room with me. My mom has RP and she's legally blind from it. So she was fully aware of what was ahead of me. And she felt really, really guilty. And I can't even remember being told, honestly. Maybe I blocked it out. But I remember talking to my dad, and he was trying to get a feel for how I thought about it. And I remember thinking like, well, my mom still sees, because my mom's not blind, where she doesn't see anything. So I said, I'll still be able to see, and that's what I thought as a kid, I'll still be able to see. I'll be fine. Mom can still see a little bit. But what I didn't think about is how it's going to impact my career, my ability to drive, and how it's just going to affect daily life for me, and how it's something that I'm going to have to live with that other people are not living with. And that's what creeps in over time. You're your own worst enemy, processing this information. As you go about your day, you're in the shower, you're thinking about it sometimes. You're at work, you're thinking about it. You're going to be hard on yourself. So wouldn't it be helpful if you had a soft intro into it? Like a doctor was like, you have retinitis pigmentosa. It's a rare disease which causes blindness, but there's lots of great resources out there, and plenty of people have great lives who have RP. There's lots of different ways you can adapt to it, and there's great people in the community that you can connect with. There's a lot you can do to reclaim control of your life. And, I feel like that's kind of the message we want to hear, but sometimes we're just told very coldly we have something, and when we're diagnosed with something, and then we go home to Dr. Google, as my last guest, Andy Ock, says, and then you start to, read about going blind. So then your anxiety skyrockets, and it's a weird scenario. It's a lot of anxiety comes with vision loss, whether it's, driving, when to not drive, like I talked about in that article, traveling, if you use a guide dog, is everything figured out beforehand? If you're a cane user, are you going to be able to find your way out the airport? But there's no one out there who isn't afraid of vision loss, or was afraid of vision loss at one point in their life. If you're scared out there, it's okay. I'm terrified of losing, my vision, but I'm doing the work that I feel needed to feel more comfortable with losing vision by doing this podcast, talking to my guest, reading these articles, studying it, addressing it head on, and building a community of friends who, are dealing with what I'm going to deal with. Yeah, I don't know. This episode started really high with the new logo and new merch, and then I went over some articles and got real serious, but it's all interesting, and in these solo episodes, I'm going to go over articles like this. I'm going to go over current events, and I'm going to cover, some topics that, relate to what we're all going through. So this is something to look forward to. If you like this is something that will be a part of, future episodes. But yeah, let's keep this episode moving. I have an audience question that I want to play, and then I'm going to respond to the question. All right, so let's get into this listener question. Let's hear the question first.
Hi Lance and all the listeners on the See-Through podcast. My name is Ryan. I'm 36 years old from a small town in the UK called Corby, and I, like Lance, have retinitis pigmentosa. And today, Lance, I'd like to ask you a question about how you and myself would deal with night blindness and the effect it has. Obviously, this is something, it's probably the first, most early symptom of retinitis pigmentosa, something that your family would pick up on before you get diagnosed. Obviously, diagnosed myself when I was 12 years old. It's something my family had noticed from like holidays to Ireland, etc, when we were out in the countryside, not being able to see a complete thing, just like my granddad and my mum before me. So it's kind of like, what sort of gadgets and what sort of devices do we use basically to help us see in the night time? Like for myself, I've got a couple of torches that maybe I'll go out with at night time when I'm walking the dog and sort of go on there. They're quite big strobe light type things, very, very bright, and it's good. But going on to another, on a device just on my phone, which is just in my hand right now. Like it was Christmas last year. I was letting the dog out in the garden. Obviously had a few drinks, so I was sitting there being a bit jolly, just waiting on the dog. Been like 2 or 3 minutes had gone past, and I was sort of thinking, where is he? Has he come back in the house yet, or is he still outside? And obviously, with the night blindness, I couldn't see if he was out in the garden or anything, and I couldn't hear him, couldn't do nothing. So, whilst my phone was in my hands, I'd lift it up, sort of see maybe if I can film him, get like something on the camera with flash, or you can see anything. But before it even had a chance to press any buttons, the camera just automatically went into this night mode, and it was like someone had switched the light on, and it was complete, like almost like daytime. I could see him completely clear, just right in the middle of the garden doing his business, and it was like mind blowing that the phone was capable of doing something like this without any prompts or anything like that. It was like very impressive. So, are there any gadgets that you are using or anything that you've got your eye on that maybe you could potentially think about using in the future? Anything that maybe your listeners would be interested in hearing about and maybe finding out in the future if they can use them too? Thank you.
Shout out to Ryan. Thanks for sending that in. And I hope you're feeling better, man. I know you just had another injury. That sucks, dude. It really does. But let's talk about your question. So you're asking about, tools for seeing at night or in dark. Yeah, that's probably a classic RP question right there. Something that everyone with RP deals with is how do we handle low light? All right, so let's talk about the actual tools I use, And to be honest with you, I'm using the same shit you're using. I'm using my phone. I'm using the camera. I'm using a camera on the phone to see things in the dark. Maybe I'll change the exposure. I'm using the camera's flashlight. I'm so fast at that I can go, and then the flashlight's on. I'm really quick at turning that thing on, and I use it all the time. And then I also have an identification cane, which I'll bring out with me at night if I'm walking my dog with my wife. And it helps me kind of fill steps and, pockets of darkness where, sidewalks are completely dark because there's no street lights. Luckily in my neighborhood, there's a lot of street lights around, but certain streets are darker than others. Usually if there's a bunch of trees. So I use an ID cane to help navigate there. And if you don't use a cane, Ryan, get an ID cane. Mine's about 45 inches long, and I bring it out. It folds up real small. You put it in your pocket, but bust that out at night. It'll help you feel for things. It's almost like an arm extension, as you, feel around. I can send a link to that. In fact, I'll have a link in the show description for the ID cane I have. So yeah, ID cane, phone. Steve from the RP show, who I hosted and got to spend time with at RP Fest, he was a big advocate of the headlamp, and like campers use, where you put it on your head. And he had the brightest one possible, he told me. So maybe get a headlamp, if you're going outside at night, that could be super helpful. And the last thing I'll bring up in terms of advice for getting around at night is that's not really a tool, like a tangible tool that you hold, but it's really just like a thought process, like analyzing the space you're in. Can you get there while there's light and kind of see the layout and then make a mental map so that way you're able to kind of navigate it easier when it is dark. It's like the streets in my neighborhood, for example, like there's street lights that help me see, but I've also walked them so many times so I know the layout, which is helpful. Certain restaurants, it's dark in there, but I've been there so many times. I know the layout. I know where the bathroom is. Certain movie theaters, I've been there enough to where I know the layout and I get there early, so like getting there early while the lights are still on that's a trick, you know? I mean, it's not like a practical tool. And then I also get aisle seats, right? So this is a helpful tip. Like I get aisle seats in movie theaters and concerts or entertainment events. I'll get an aisle seat. So if I have to get up, if I absolutely have to get up, which I try my best not to, I can find my seat again when I get back, because I'll be able to look at the aisle seats and kind of know where I am. So it's just kind of like planning ahead, thinking through, getting an aisle seat so you don't have to maneuver through a group of people at events. If you're at a restaurant, try to make a mental map, you know, go to places that you're familiar with. Or if you're going to somewhere new, try your best to get familiar with it as you walk in, or go earlier in the day to check it out. And then in terms of actual tools, you got the ID cane, you got your phone's camera and flashlight, and then you have Steve's headlamp that he was talking about. I think that's the best tools, honestly. And if anyone else out there watching, you know, knows of a tool that's helpful, leave a comment and let Ryan know, you know, because, you know, to be honest, like, I'm not the like best resource for like practical tips because I have so much usable vision, but you know, I can provide some tips, but not all tips. So if you're listening, for sure, leave a comment if I missed something. But with that audience question answered, I think that wraps up this episode. This is a big episode for me because, you know, I got the new logo out there, I got the new merch out there, and everyone's caught up to speed on, you know, the stats of my podcast, the goals of my podcast. I'm really looking forward to this next chapter. And if you've been listening from the beginning, I want to say thank you again. You know, I'm very, very excited about where I'm headed with this podcast. And I hope you enjoy this ride with me. And I hope you grow with me as this podcast grows. And I appreciate your support. And I appreciate you listening. And with that said, I'll throw this out there. If you want to be featured in an episode, just send in a question. Your question can be featured just like Ryan's question. I'll answer it. It'll be part of a solo episode. You can DM it to me on social media. The handle is at @seethroughpod, and that's for Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. Or you can email it to me at theseethroughpodcast@gmail.com. Links to all of that is in the show description. Send me a question. I'd love to answer it in a future episode. It can be about anything. It can be RP related, or you can ask me a question that has nothing to do with RP and disabilities at all. It can be something like, does pineapple go on pizza? And the answer is yes, it does. I'm a big fan of pineapple on pizza. But yeah, just send a question. I'd love to hear from you. Buy some merch. Subscribe to the podcast. Follow me on social media. The handle is @seethroughpod. And if you want to support me in another way, you can join my Patreon, become a member of the See-Through Few for only $5 a month. You get to support me and get exclusive content that is only available on Patreon. I feel like this episode's a big sales pitch, so I'm thankful that you're working with me on this. So thanks for sticking around and hearing me sell all this to you. But that wraps up this episode. Stay transparent, everyone.